All right, welcome back. Clearwater Jazz Holidays Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. Brandon Robertson, jazz bowing the next level. What's up?
How y'all doing this evening, this afternoon?
We don't know when it is, and particularly with your crazy schedule, it could be morning, it could be the middle of the night. We don't know.
And we're hanging in there. We're hanging in there.
All right, all good, man. We're recording these sessions for the purposes of Clearwater Jazz Holiday Education and Outreach. We're going to get right into it with Brandon today on this topic, but be sure to check out the resources in the studio where you can see all of the past Young Lions sessions, including a bunch from Brandon, a bunch of really good ones. Where do I begin as a professional musician? Simple tools during a performance. Preparation for performance, how to develop melodic bass lines, tempos and styles, how to develop endurance during a performance, thinking like a horn player from a bass perspective, how to capture a big sound, and we just keep building. Brandon's a regular part of these sessions now, and we really appreciate that. He's an Emmy-nominated music director, professional upright electric bassist, composer, music educator originally from Tampa. He's director of jazz studies down at Florida Gulf Coast University in Fort Myers, Florida, and he was nominated for an Emmy Award for Best Documentary for Educational Collegiate Programs featuring the Florida Gulf Coast University Jazz Ensemble, a prominent band leader. He has taken his band on multiple national tours, headlining at some of the top jazz venues in the country, and to add to his impressive resume, he's performed with a lot of notable acts, including the world-famous Count Basie Orchestra led by director Scotty Barnhart and many, many others. Check out his first debut album called Based on a True Story. That's Bass, B-A-S-S' on a True Story. That came out in the fall of 2019 and reached all the way to number 16 on the iTunes Top 200. Man, oh man, Brandon Robertson, welcome back. The stage is all yours, my friend.
Thank you, Steve, for that glorious introduction as usual. You know, you did it this time. You told me last session you was going to try to get me to blush. It worked this time. So I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Lee, and everyone from the Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association. Thank you all for having me. So for today's topic, this was a topic that I hadn't seen covered yet, and I thought it would be an interesting one because I have a lot of young students who always ask me about arcoing on when it comes to jazz. It's something that's not ventured a lot into because, as I tell a lot of my students, you know, what separates good bass players from great bass players is those who are proficient in both electric and upright. And I've noticed that guys who are proficient in both areas work a whole lot more than those who are just only good at one or the other. One of the features that I find very intriguing as I started to get more involved with my bass development and my knowledge of the upright bass and just its idioms within several different genres was that a lot of bass players don't arco when it comes to jazz. And I found that it is extremely difficult to do that, only because you have to have not only excellent technique in your left hand, but you also have to have a great deal of technique in your right hand when you're holding the bow. And so one of my examples here, and I'm going to grab my bow real quick. So one of the things that I noticed too when I notice a bass player who solos with the bow is their bows are usually shorter. Now, this is a 3/4 French bow, okay, a French bass bow. Now, the most bass players that I've noticed that who take solos arco, their bow is probably almost half the size or a little bit bigger than, or a little bit smaller than this particular bow. This is actually a pretty small bow. This is a half-size bow. So it's for a 3/4 bass, but it's light, it's durable, and as you can see, it has a little dip right here. That dip is very important. It's useful because when you start digging into the string, it creates it grounds it. It keeps it a lot more grounded. Now, one of my all-time favorite bass players, and I've said this on a lot of my sessions here, is Christian McBride. What I love about Christian McBride is the clarity that he gets out of the bass when he arcos. I mean, it's very clear to the point where you're like, how is he not playing any wrong notes with the way he's bowing? Because sometimes some of the stuff he plays is so fast, and I'm like, man, this is crazy, like how he's doing it. So I started studying like different bass players who are known throughout history to arco. Probably the most famous, prominent person that I guess young players would associate jazz arco with is Paul Chambers. But I'm going to go further back. I'm actually going to start with Major Holly and Slam Stewart. Now, if you're not familiar with these two gentlemen were not only huge pioneers in the bass world, but particularly they were one of the first, if not the first, to invent and create the style of singing while playing. So Major Holly and Slam Stewart were notably famous for being able to sing while accompanying themselves on bass. And they made their whole career based off of that. They're probably one of the only few bassists throughout history that did a whole entire career based off of singing and playing at the same time. There's a particular record that I actually referenced, which you can find later on, located in the studio session on clearwaterjazz.com. And it'll be listed under session material. But there's an album that the two of them came out, a duo album with Dick Hyman on piano and Oliver Jackson, which was called Shut Your Mouth. Okay. And particularly the song that I want you guys to go and listen to on that album is I Love You by Cole Porter. And I Love You, the very beginning of the song, you hear Slam Stewart singing the melody as he's playing it. He's arcoing the melody, but he's singing, he's accompanying himself by singing the melody in thirds. So he's harmonizing a third above the melody notes while he's playing it. And that was something I wanted to introduce to you all, as this is the first form of introduction when you hear jazz bowing. And then as in the 50s, when it started to roll around a little more in the 50s, now you come across Paul Chambers. Now, Paul Chambers is the giant. He's like, you hear the old children's story, Jack and the Beanstalk. Yeah, he's the giant when it comes to this jazz bowing, because the way his style of arcoing is so unique and it cannot be replicated. If you heard him play jazz arco, you would know it's Paul Chambers playing. And one of the characteristics that Paul did a lot was he used gut strings. So he was one of the few bassists throughout history that actually played on an entire set of gut strings. All the famous recordings, from Relaxing to Cooking to Working to Steaming to Kinda Blue to Milestones, all those famous recordings that Miles did in the 50s, Paul Chambers was playing on gut strings. But there's one particular jazz solo, arco solo, that Paul Chambers took, and it wasn't with the Miles Davis quintet. It was with John Coltrane's group, particularly on the song Moment's Notice off of Blue Train, off of John Coltrane's record Blue Train. And Paul Chambers, if you listen to that solo, it is so rhythmically complex. But when I transcribed the solo, because I actually wanted to learn it, he's playing a lot of diatonic notes. And what I mean by diatonic, I mean notes that are found within that chord, not passing tones which would be like the second or the fourth or the sixth. We're talking 1, 3, 5, 7, just the triadic intervals of that chord. And that's primarily what he centered his solo around. And so when you hear him play, it rhythmically sounds very complex, but harmonically, he's not playing a lot of notes. Like, he's not playing a lot of structure. So there's two types of styles that you can play. Also, there's another recording that I added into my session material, and this is by another bassist, Red Mitchell. Now, Red Mitchell, everybody, let me tell you, he gets slept on a lot. Red Mitchell, he's one of those bass players that kind of came out of the school of Major Holly and Slam Stewart, but his thing was more bebop-y. So he would sing, but he was singing a bebop style, which was hip. So when he was solo, it sounded very bluesy and bebop-ish, you know. And he actually, there was an interview that I saw online on YouTube that he actually made reference to Major Holly and said that Major Holly was a big influence on him and was the reason why he chose to start learning how to sing and play at the same time, because no one was really doing that. And even to this day, a lot of people don't do that. Esperanza Spalding, you know, is probably the more modern day contemporary bassist who has popularized singing and playing again. But there are dozens amount of bass players out there doing it. She's just on a higher platform. But there's a video that I also added in that session too of Christian McBride and Esperanza Spalding doing a duo together of Duke Ellington's Sophisticated Lady. And what's hip about that is that Esperanza sings the melody as Christian is accompanying her arcoing. Then he takes an arco solo while Esperanza is harmonizing. She's singing, she's humming the chord changes under him while he's arcoing. And I wanted to demonstrate those various examples, because with jazz arco, there also comes proficiency with your time. And I'm going to give an example of what I mean by that. So give me a second here. Uh-oh. There goes my microphone. Okay. All right. Okay, can you guys hear me? All right. So everybody, so this is going to be an example. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to play a melody by Horace Silver called Peace. And what I'm going to demonstrate is just the clarity that you would need as a jazz bassist. One of the things that you want to make sure that your bow, particularly, is not tight all the way. You don't want to choke the hair. And what we mean by that is, if you put the bow on a string, and I know this is kind of difficult to see through a video, but if you see, if I press down like this, my bow is very flexible. If I were to tighten the hairs completely, like now my hairs on my bow is completely tight. I can't turn the knob anymore. Now I can't press down. I can't press down at all, right? So you get that kind of sound. So you want to make sure that you have a very loose but not super restricted bow, okay? Secondly, you want to make sure that you have rosin on your bow. It's very important that you rosin your bow. If you don't rosin your bow, people, it's going to sound terrible, okay? You're going to get this. It's almost like if you were to step on a cat's tail and you hear the cat screech. That's what it sounds like when you don't have rosin on your bow. So everyone, please, that's watching this, make sure you rosin your bow, okay? Now I'm going to play this melody for you. Now what I want you to listen for is the clarity. Now I'm going to make mistakes purposely just so I can demonstrate what happens when you don't have good technique with the bow. All right, so this is Horace Silver's Piece. So this is what happens if you have bad bow technique. Now, that sounds terrible. I promise I don't play like that. However, the reason why it sounds like that is because there's a couple of things. If you're a young player and you don't know how to balance the weight in your right hand, then what you could do to work on that is play a lot of long tones, okay? And if you're learning a jazz melody, learn the melody arco first. Don't learn it pizzicato, and learn it very slowly, okay? So this will be the example of that. So I would play the entire first half of that tune out of time. I just want to get the intervals and the notes in tune together. Now, what I did there is I'm trying to get as clear of a sound as possible. So when you're playing with the bow will expose your intonation. That's why a lot of bass players don't play with the bow, because it exposes their intonation. So you don't want to create a situation for yourself where you're playing out of tune a lot. And so if you're going to do any kind of jazz bowing, you have to be very relaxed and use a shorter bow. So if I were to play the melody in time and correctly, I'm going to use a much shorter bow, and I'm also going to be a lot more expressive. And you have to be expressive when you use the bow playing jazz. If not, it just sounds boring and plain. Okay? Now, what I did there is I played very light. I was very expressive on the higher notes. And what I mean by the higher notes, there's what we like to call musical center points in melodies. Usually those center points is where you want to give it the most expression or dynamics. It gives the melody, it makes the melody stick out a lot more. Okay. Also, one thing that I did, and I'm going to demonstrate it here, so hopefully you guys can hear me. I tilt my bow back a lot, and the reason why I tilt my bow back is because it keeps the bow parallel to the floor. So in the screen here, I like to describe the bow as two things. You like scrubbing toilets, or you die. Now you're going to say, what? And this is exactly what I tell all my bass students. When you're driving on the highway, you're parallel to the opposite side of the highway, right? So if you were to veer off to your left, you're going to hit the median or another car. So you're going to die. If you are like someone like I was growing up, you had to do chores. So one thing that you probably don't like to do is when your parents say, go clean the bathroom. Go clean that toilet. I'm not scrubbing no toilets. Well, guess what? If you tilt your bow down to the floor and you play like this, you're scrubbing a toilet. So the example that I use to my bass students who like to play jazz arco, I say, don't scrub the toilet and don't die. Stay parallel, clean, and safe. When you're parallel, you're clean and safe. When you go to the right, you're scrub. When you go to the left, you die. Middle, clean and safe, parallel to the floor. Right? So if I were to do like an F blues or something, so if I had a Now, what I did there, also, what I wanted to show us that you don't have to use a whole lot of bow. I see a lot of young players do this. That's not going to work. Shorter bows and shorter ideas. See, when you play pizzicato, I can do all that stuff. I could do that all pizzicato. It doesn't sound like that when you arco. It's the total opposite. So usually what I tell my bass students, and this is good advice for any young player that wants to learn how to play arco jazz, is play shorter fragments and much shorter ideas. Because you got to think you're simultaneously doing two things at the same time. You're physically moving your left hand to get the note, but then you're bowing. You're trying to get the bowing of that note at the same speed that your left hand is moving. So as I stated in my previous sessions, the left always has to know what the right is doing, and the right has to always know what the left is doing, right? So an example, if I played a shorter figure, if I was doing in a key of F, so if I did something like now that's very simple, super simple. But if I was playing that for an audience, it gives the audience enough time to digest what it is that I just did, right? And when you're playing with the bow, the key factor is to making sure that you are not only clear and accurate, but you're also breathing and you're taking your time. You're not, and you cannot play tense. Whenever you bow, you cannot play tense. So if you can see kind of like my muscle here kind of poking out, that comes from you gripping the bow too hard. And when you do that, you're actually going to choke your lines that you're trying to play. So if I were to play stiff like that, it'll sound like this. I can't even get my notes clear because I'm so stiff. So you have to make sure you're relaxed, okay? All right. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're not only relaxed, but you want to also not dig so hard. That's the one thing that I actually learned from listening to Paul Chambers' arco solos, and even Sam Jones. Sam Jones has a few good arco solos out there. And what I learned from listening to those guys is they play very light, like they don't put a lot of weight on the string, so they can get that clarity. Also, you also have to kind of think like a horn player when you're using the bow, because now that you have a bow, you can actually tie a whole lot more notes in your phrases versus if you were to pizzicato, because when you pizzicato on a bass, you have to do a pull off or a hammer on to kind of get that emulate that sound of that you're trying to connect some notes together versus playing them separately by pitzing. But when you play with arco, when you play with the bow, now you're able to slur or tie a lot more notes under your hand. So if you hear really good bass jazz solos, which were the ones that I referred to you on the studio session for the session materials, those recordings, the examples I gave were very clear and precise bass solos that not only you can hear clearly, but their phrasing, it almost sounds like it's a sax or a trumpet. It sounds like a horn player that's playing, when they phrase. So those are some of the key things that I would suggest that you would look over. So make sure that you work on long tones, a lot of long tone, open strings, nothing crazy. You want to make sure that when you're holding the bow, that you tilt it just slightly towards you, not all the way where it's like the wood part is touching the string, but you want the bow to tilt just slightly so the hair that's on the string, it sits flat. So when you tilt your bow, your hair actually sits like this. It'll sit completely flat. So that way it's parallel. Like I said before, you veer off to the right, you're scrubbing the toilet. You go to the left, it's lights out for you. Stay in the middle, you're clean and safe. Nothing to worry about, okay? And so, yeah, that's pretty much my my take on the history of jazz. Oh, there is one more thing. There's one more thing. When you are trying to learn or transcribe an arco solo, my advice is to learn it pizzicato first. And I say that because you can get a lot more clarity in terms of what the notes are that they're playing when you pitch it, because you can physically pluck the note, versus when you're bowing it, there's a lot of ambiguous sounds that could arise. So for instance, if you hit a note, but your fingers might be like, you might be slightly sharp or flat. Well, if you're playing it with the bow, that note is being bent. So you have no idea where the center of that actual note is. But if you pizzicato it, you will be able to hear it clear because of the reaction time that it comes back to you. Okay, so that would be my only other advice about transcribing solos with arco. All right, and I think that concludes my portion. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, man, all in a day's work. Great job again, Brandon. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to remind people to check those upcoming sessions, because you've got a few of them on the books with us coming up. We've got one about understanding the sound of jazz. We have one that you're going to be doing with Tyler Wertman on playing duo performances, which is going to be really great. We love Tyler. It's going to be fun to have the two of you together in a session.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one.
Creating new music composition and charts. I think that's a unique one to sort of add to the variety of things we're presenting here. I'm looking forward to that one in particular. And then lastly, how to accompany a vocalist, which is we're trying to do more with vocalists, as you know, and I think that's going to be a really good one too.
Yeah, can I chime in on, like, really quickly on that particular session?
Of course.
So I decided that I wanted to do a session that catered to vocalists, because I actually asked that question a lot. You work with a lot of vocalists. How do you accompany them? Like, how is it that you've done shows with just bass and voice? Like, how does that work? I did a show with the Juno winner, Lila Bialy, who she won a Juno Award last year for best vocal jazz album. She beat Diane Krall, who is Canada's like queen, which I was like, wow, that's, you made it if you could take out Diane Krall. But I did a whole 3-day concert with her, just bass and voice, and we did over, I think it was over 50 standards. I did quite a few standards, some that I had never heard of before, some that are obviously the popular choices. But I wanted to do this session because after I did that show with her, she actually said something to me very interesting. She said, I don't know a lot of instrumentalists who really understand how to play behind a singer. And I feel that you've done a great job of trying to learn how to accompany a singer, because as instrumentalists, we get in our own way of our ego. Our ego gets in our own way because, if we sound good, we sound good. We're going to make it known. We want people to know that. We're going to throw it in your face. We're going to make it very obvious. Yes, I am the best one here. However, though, when you start to accompany someone else, especially a singer, that role changes. You are now the accompanist, which means it ain't about you. So that's why I wanted to address that, because even for young pianists who are looking to get out there and gig, and most of your gigging in the earlier stages, if you plan accompanying with singers, you're going to work, especially if it's just duo, right? But you need to understand your role. not me as a rhythm section player. This goes for horn players. Anybody that becomes the accompanying role for the vocalist. And then also I'm going to address to the vocalist, how do you not upset your instrumentalist players? Because there are things that vocalists need to understand and know how we think in order to not come across like you don't know what you're doing, because that's what it seems to be a lot of the times with instrumentalists. This vocalist don't know what she's doing or he's doing, or they don't know what he's doing. And then that may not actually be the case. It could just be a miscommunication error because somebody doesn't know how to convey that type of structure. So that's what I want to address with that particular session. I just wanted to make that known, while that's out there.
Yeah, no, that's going to be a really good one. So people can check out all these upcoming sessions at clearwaterjazz.com. Some really great musicians in the next couple weeks. As usual, we've got Jeremy Carter coming up again with us. Of course, Tyler. We had Alejandro Arenas with us earlier today. Jeff Rupert follows this session today. And this Friday, we've got a conversation with Wycliffe Gordon and Frank Williams. It's going to be good. So I'm going to put a shout out to all of our extended family of musicians. Hopefully everyone can join up in that room on that Zoom call, because that is going to be great. And like Brandon said, all of these sessions are archived now. So please take advantage of that. You can watch them in the studio, which is brought to you by Blue Water Wealth Management at Steward Partners, or you can listen to them. And you can listen to them by visiting the Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions podcast, wherever you stream podcasts. It's available on most major platforms. And what's really cool is we launched last few weeks a History of Jazz archive to complement our History of Jazz program in the schools. And it's called the Stop Time series with Frank Williams. And in Frank's one-of-a-kind style, he walks you through a history of jazz from the Civil War era, really, and all the way through modern day. It's an ambitious outline of videos, and it's also available on the podcast. There's about maybe close to 40 of them up on the site already. So check that out. It's a really, really fun way to learn about the history of this great music. And we're really inspired because as schools try to figure out their new normal right now with band programs, these resources have been received really well, and that makes us really proud to be part of. So hopefully we're putting a lot of good content out there for students and really music lovers of all ages to enjoy. So with that said, Brandon, it's always a pleasure, man. Thanks for being part of this.
Oh, thank you guys for having me, man. And also to the Aldown and Tampa Bay Jazz Association, please, thank you guys for having me as well. Lee, always great to see you as well, buddy. And Gary, thank you for joining in with us. And, I really appreciate, you guys doing this. I've talked to several or a few of the band teachers that are in my area, and I've actually introduced them to you guys as resources, and they've been using them. One of them actually emailed me back and was like, "Thank you so much for sending me this, because I had no idea what I'm going to do in my class." So I said, "Yeah." So Steve, you guys are doing the right thing, and I'm so honored to be part of this. So thank y'all for continuing to have me.
Cool, man. I love to hear that. Thank you for sharing all these things with everybody in your neck of the woods. We hope to spread the word and keep building this wonderful treasure. So for everybody listening, on behalf of Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation and all our partners, stay safe out there, be well, and keep playing. We'll see you soon.
All right, guys, take care. Have a good one.